Ukrainian drones strike deep into Russian territory, overwhelming air defense systems and causing a massive blackout in Belgorod.
Late afternoon on September 28, 2025, a moment that seemed ordinary to millions suddenly became a fateful instant. At exactly 1834, the screens in the air defense command centers along Russia's western border simultaneously flipped red. It was not a single alarm bell but a cascade of alerts, like drums sounding across the region. This was no isolated raid. It was a meticulously coordinated attack aimed at three oblasts at once: Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. At the same moment, two Ukrainian M142 HIMARS batteries had covertly taken firing positions. They were concealed behind residential areas north of Kharkiv, close enough to reach their targets, yet still in relatively safe positions. When the alarms went off, dozens of low and medium altitude targets streaked across the border from deep inside Ukrainian territory. But these were not the cheap FPV drones we usually see in battlefield clips. The unmanned aerial vehicles in this formation were UJ-26 Bober ER and Sheila 400, long-range loitering munitions, kamikaze drones, each carrying warheads of 30 to 50 kilograms. They surged forward with a clear mission: to jam, to sow disorder, to stretch and deplete the opponent's air defense systems. Immediately, Panzer S-1 and Tor M2 batteries in the area reacted violently. The sky erupted with trails of interceptors and flak. Every successful interception was logged as a victory in the books of the operators at the Russian control centers, on their control screens. For a moment, officers breathed easy. Airspace secure, systems functioning smoothly. But that sense of security was artificial, the surface of a carefully staged scenario designed to conceal what was coming next. While the air defense eyes tirelessly hunted noise in the low sky, another threat stealthily advanced from the higher atmosphere, a threat entirely different in nature. As chaos peaked, Belgorod surveillance radars began to display 6 distinct bright returns on the screens. Unlike UAVs, these did not fly horizontally like drones. They plunged straight down from the upper layers of the atmosphere at speeds exceeding Mach 2.5. The command room fell silent. The turning moment had arrived. These were no longer UAVs. They were M31 GMLRS rockets launched from M142 HIMARS platforms. The Russian command reacted immediately. They activated their trump card, an S-400 battery that had been kept secret in a priority position. It was the most valuable asset in the area. Radar 92 N6E, the giant eye, powered up to full output and locked onto all 6 targets. Within seconds, 648 N6DM interceptor missiles were fired, streaking out at roughly Mach 6. Moments later, 6 bright detonations flared high in the atmosphere. In the Russian control center, an officer's voice announced, "All targets destroyed, missiles hit, all 6 ballistic threats intercepted." A wave of pride swept through the center. They believed they had repelled one of the most complex attacks in the region's history. Few suspected this was only a sophisticated trap. Hundreds of kilometers to the west, in a secret command bunker on the other side of the line, Ukrainian commanders were not disappointed. On the contrary, they were celebrating. The crucial part of the plan had worked. The campaign's first act had begun hours earlier. A few hours before, a vast swarm of UAVs, hundreds of them, had been launched to simultaneously strike 8 Russian territories: Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Tula, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Novgorod, and Samara. This was one of the largest and most coordinated UAV assaults Russia had ever experienced, an unprecedented reign of drones in modern warfare. But the swarm's objective was not to directly destroy a strategic target. Their task was to weave a curtain of chaos. Although the Russian military declared victory, they did not know they had fallen into a giant trap. Hundreds of unmanned aerial vehicles appeared simultaneously, forcing air defenses to disperse their fire. Their aim was not to cause damage, but to compel expensive air defense systems to fire widely, depleting munitions, scattering radar scans in many directions, and, most importantly, forcing high-end systems like the S-400 to switch their radars to high output, thereby revealing their position and electronic fingerprint. Because the real target was not in the sky, it lay deep inside the territory, about 90 kilometers from Kharkiv, the Belgorodskaya TETS thermal power plant, the lifeblood center of the region's military-industrial network. This plant did not only generate megawatts for hundreds of thousands of civilians, it powered supply hubs, repair depots, reloading stations, and, critically, the radars, communications, and command centers of the Russian 20th Guards Corps, the unit responsible for some of the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. Therefore, it was tightly protected. Precisely because of that strategic importance, Ukraine devised a clever plan. Use expensive bait to expose the cold-blooded face of the opponent's air defenses. This was where Ukrainian craftiness paid off. In the command bunker, an electronic warfare officer stared at a glowing screen. The S-400 signal had lit up, its exact frequency, scan angle, and strength exposed clearly. "Fire! We've locked its coordinates, frequencies, and radar signature," he said. The initial HIMARS rockets, though worth millions of dollars each, were not aimed at the ultimate target. They were used as bait, costly rounds to force the S-400 to reveal itself and to feed electronic data back to the intelligence center. What the Russians thought was a victory turned out to be a merciless trap. Those HIMARS missiles, each worth several $million, were not an attack vehicle in the conventional sense. They were the most expensive and fastest lures in history. Their mission was not to strike a target, but to force the secret S-400 to fire and disclose its location. With that information, everything proceeded coldly and precisely. A lethal gap was opened in Russia's defense system. The S-400's position data and radar fingerprint were transmitted immediately to a second HIMARS battery waiting in another location and to kamikaze UAV teams like the UJ-26 Bober closing in on the objective. The official hunt began. At 1846, the second HIMARS battery received new fire orders. 6 more GMLRS rounds left their rails, aimed at what they knew to be the weakest point, a vulnerable primary target that was reloading missiles at that moment or in a critical recalibration cycle, lasting a few seconds after heavy engagement. The thermal power plant, the heart of Belgorod's power grid. With this second launch, the victorious atmosphere in the Russian command center gave way to a chilling shock. 6 new ballistic traces appeared on the screens. The second wave was coming. Shouts rang out. The M31 GMLRS rockets had crossed into Russian territory within 40 seconds from a near-edge-of-space trajectory, because the S-400, after firing, also undergoes a short, blind cycle, a few precious seconds during which processing, reloading, and reacquisition are temporarily impaired. While Pantsir and Tor were still busy intercepting drone swarms, the large radar screen suddenly lit up again with 6 plunging traces. Panic cries rose as officers in the command room struggled to reactivate the S-400, but the system could not respond in time to the threat, and a Russian officer tried to alert his superiors. At that exact moment, a UJ-26 Bober, which had been hugging the ground while concealed, dove straight into the S-400's radar command vehicle. The S-400's radar was not designed to detect and shoot down such a small target at such close range. The surrounding Pantsir and Tor systems were busy targeting other drone swarms approaching from different directions. The 40-kilogram warhead's detonation struck the control brain, plunging the gravestone radar into darkness for several seconds. In those few seconds, a deadly aperture opened in the defense network. As the UJ-26 Bober attacked the S-400's brain with its 40-kilogram warhead, fewer than 30 seconds remained before the HIMARS rockets would reach the target. The gravestone radar went black for several seconds. This was the moment the only system capable of stopping the second strike was disabled. Those silent seconds were enough to destroy any chance of intervention. When the Sentinel went dark, 6 HIMARS were already on their way to the target. At 1847, when the radar screens went dead, nothing could stop them. 6 HIMARS, each programmed to strike with a circular error probable, CEP, of under 5 meters, descended and pierced the plant's main substation, the center of Belgorod's power grid, with absolute precision. The explosions were not isolated bangs. They triggered a chain reaction. Transformer cabinets were shredded, single-piece 90-kilogram warheads instantly demolished tons of steel and copper, huge electrical arcs tore open the night sky, and then everything, immediately after, plunged into absolute darkness. That strike did not just destroy a plant, it paralyzed both military and civilian systems. The consequences went far beyond lights going out. The plant powered the S-300 and S-400 eyes, command information systems, satellite communications nodes, and, no less importantly, railway signaling infrastructure, the lifeline network that carries fuel, ammunition, and troops. When power collapsed, the military immediately felt blind and deaf. Situational awareness was lost, communication severed, and maneuverability reduced. A domino effect was set in motion. Thousands of rail cars, fuel tankers, and trains were stuck because electronic signaling no longer functioned. At the civilian level, a city of 500,000 descended into chaos. Water pumps stopped, internet connections were cut, elevators stalled between floors, heating systems failed, water supplies were interrupted, supermarkets and roads were clogged as traffic lights went dark. Gas stations became battlegrounds for fuel to run generators. Miles of queues formed. In many places, scuffles broke out as people fought over every can of fuel. A comprehensive crisis bloomed within hours. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense hastily declared it had shot down hundreds of UAVs. The figure 230 appeared in statements, but they did not realize they had in fact walked into a giant trap. That grand claim collapsed when the governor of Belgorod had to admit publicly at 1907 that the Kremlin faced a bitter truth. Critical infrastructure had been hit and a wide blackout was underway. On the evening of September 28th, Russian media attempts to call the incident a transformer failure were exposed within seconds by NASA's firm satellite system, which detected a large fire in the area, and by videos recorded by residents. This was not merely an attack. It was a symphony of war, in which more than 230 UAVs played the supporting orchestra to ensure a few HIMARS rockets could reach the most important objective. When those rockets struck, they did not only destroy a substation, they shattered the myth of the inviolability of air defenses deep inside the territory. Ukraine's precision operation against the Belgorod power plant on September 28, 2025, will go down in history as a turning point in the war. The consequences of the Belgorod strike went far beyond destroyed transformers, and cities plunged into darkness. Strategically, the fallout exceeded the loss of a few megawatts. Moscow's entire traditional military doctrine, based on holding the front separate and ensuring rear area security, was called into question. Russian military thinking had long relied on keeping war away from its borders. The Belgorod strike painfully demonstrated that this doctrine no longer holds in an era where long-range precision weapons are in Ukrainian hands. In the age of precision, long-range weapons, and integrated information warfare, a rocket launched from occupied territory can threaten rear areas previously considered safe. This saps frontline troops' morale because supply and repair lines are no longer guaranteed. Looking back at the attack, the first thing to admit is a rocket launched from occupied territory can now reach Moscow's backyard, a fact that upends assumptions about rear area safety. The psychological impact on troops at the front is devastating in the truest sense. When supplies, repair capability, and communications become fragile, fighting spirit erodes because the rear is no longer a secure anchor. To understand the genius of the operation, one must first understand the objective. Belgorodskaya TETS was not a randomly chosen civilian target. It was the heart of a military-industrial network. Repair depots, component factories, ammunition warehouses, and auxiliary command centers. Ukraine's aim was not merely to take a few megawatts. The real target was everything that depended on those megawatts. According to assessments by several defense research organizations, including the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, Belgorod Oblast functions as a key logistical hub for Russia's entire military campaign in Ukraine. It is not only a transshipment point for supplies and ammunition, but also hosts command posts and the main supply depots of the 20th Guards Army Group, the force responsible for the fiercest fighting in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine. When power was cut, ammunition depots went silent, armored repair shops halted, electronic eavesdropping systems were severed, and, most importantly, forward command centers were plunged into darkness and silence. Even with backup generators, they could not spin the giant S-400 radar antennas for hours, nor could they simultaneously sustain strategic satellite communications terminals and supply power to barracks housing thousands of troops. That night, commanders felt dragged out of the 21st century digital battlefield and back into the analog world of the 20th century. Encrypted communication lines were severed, situational screens went dark, and the information flow from the front vanished as if cut by a blade. It was like pulling the life support from the brain of an army. In an instant, Russia's entire command and response apparatus fell mute as the gears of the Great War Machine abruptly ground to a halt. Industrial production lines screeched and stopped. Shell case presses fell silent, robotic welding arms hung mid-air, precision CNC machines could not run on fluctuating generator power. Each passing hour meant hundreds of rounds not produced, dozens of fighting vehicles not repaired in time, and fewer convoys of supplies delivered. Plants like Karachevsky Electrail, which produces crucial electrical connectors for military purposes, were knocked offline, and the whole industrial supply chain felt as if a crowbar had been jammed into its gears. Stop, still, broken. But the most brutal link was the railways, the army's steel backbone. A series of electrified lines running from Russia's interior to the Donbass and Crimea via Rostov in the south were cut. Signaling systems, switch controls, and management communications were paralyzed. Trains carrying fuel, ammunition, and troops were trapped in a dark labyrinth. In an instant, a strategic transport network froze. Thousands of tons of steel rendered useless, thousands of soldiers deprived of timely resupply, all without a pitched battle on the front lines. The real brilliance of the Belgorod operation lay in its multi-layered coordination: baiting, signal collection, kamikaze strikes, and the precision blow. Using the initial HIMARS salvo as bait, accepting the cost of 6 GMLR's rounds, each costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, was a bold but deliberate decision. To force the S-400 to switch on, expose coordinates and its electronic fingerprint, then use that information to strike for real in the very window when the adversary was most blind. It was a coldly calculated art of exchange, a small price to pay to open a strategic windfall. The strategic consequences became clear. Moscow faced an impossible choice: protect the front or protect the rear. It could not do both well. The result forced Russia to pull some of its most sophisticated air defense systems away from the front line and concentrate them to protect cities like Belgorod, Kursk, and other vital sites. Every S-400 or Pantsir battery moved back opened a new door for Ukrainian aviation, loitering munitions and cruise missiles to penetrate deeper into areas once considered safe. It was an intellectual victory over brute force, a carefully calculated triumph in which the cost had been paid, but the reward was a shift in the strategic balance. Ukraine did not simply take down a power plant, it shook the belief that a deep territory air defense wall was inviolable. It forced the enemy to use its own strength against itself, pulling resources from where they were most needed and creating strategic gaps. A brilliant demonstration of 21st century warfare. The strongest is not necessarily the fastest shooter, but the one who best knows how to make the enemy defeat itself.